Today in the Daily Dose, the cultural nations of America. On a scorching hot July night in 1893 Chicago, in a city overrun with tourists attending the World's Fair, a 31-year-old associate professor named Frederick Jackson Turner delivered an essay to the American Historical Society that would forever change the study and complexity of U.S. history. What is now known as his frontier thesis, Turner explained how westward expansion and manifest destiny had stripped European settlers of their ancestral, feudalistic backgrounds, forging an American nation not by cultural differences, but by shared challenges and opportunities inherent in an ever-expanding geographic footprint. Years later, however, after the frontier had been fully tamed, Turner would reject his own frontier theory after spending years studying the many cultural pockets that make up, in his words, the United States of Europe. Turner's work would be further illuminated by Colin Woodard's 2021 publication of American Nations, where he argues that the United States is far from a homogeneous entity, but rather a collection of distinct nations replete with individual values, histories, and political orientations, all falsely crammed into the artificial and arbitrary boundaries of countries and states. Of his 11 identified nations, the oldest is Yankeedom, which was settled first along coastal Massachusetts Bay by separatist Calvinists in search of a religious utopia. For more than 4 centuries now, Yankees have maintained a strong belief that government's primary tenets should improve the lives of its citizens, and while its religious zeal has long since softened over time, the region has continued to thrive on building a more perfect society through social engineering, with an emphasis on intellectual achievement combined with the middle-class ethos and the rapid assimilation and acceptance of newly arrived foreigners. From its original foothold in New England, Yankeedom culture spread across upper New York State through the northern parts of Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and parts of the eastern Dakotas and the Canadian Maritimes. Another defining cultural aspect of Yankeedom is its ceaseless combative relationship with the Deep South, ever since the nation gained its independence from Great Britain following the Revolutionary War, which over the intervening years made the region a stronghold bastion of abolitionist sentiment and pushback that would eventually lead a divided nation into war. Although short-lived, the impact of the 17th century Dutch possession of New Amsterdam persists to this day, establishing the cultural ethos of present-day Greater New York City. Originally conceived as a multi-ethnic, religiously tolerant global trading center, the New Netherland region continues to embrace a profound sense of tolerance and diversity, while many of the region's ideals regarding freedom of inquiry and the rights of individuals were originally forced upon the other American nations at the Constitutional Convention of 1787, resulting in the Bill of Rights, which was ratified in December of 1791. After Great Britain defeated the Dutch in 1664, the Greater New York City region has largely retained the values and societal models of New Amsterdam, and while the Netherlands have long since lost their place as the center of Western commerce and finance, New York City continues its reign as a global financial giant. At its peak, the nation of New Netherland reached as far south as Delaware and southern New Jersey, now absorbed into the Midlands region, and as far north as Albany and the upper Hudson Valley, northern New Jersey, western Long Island, and southwestern Connecticut, and continues to be a dominant influence in media, publishing, fashion, and financial commerce. With the region's densely packed population of some 19 million lives, the New Netherland region continues to rival the demographics of many European nations. Founded by English Quakers who welcomed a broad mix of ethnicities and creeds to their envisioned utopian settlements along the shores of Delaware Bay, The Midlands is perhaps the most American of the 11 nations described by Woodard, which incubated and spawned the culture of Middle America and the Heartland, in which ethnicity and ideologic dogma are largely overlooked, while the moderate political opinions of its people have long considered government officials as uninvited intruders. Originally part of British North America, since its early founding, the Midlands has always been a melting pot of varying ethnicities and cultures, with people of Germanic descent comprising the largest part of its population since the late 1600s. Much like Yankees, Midlanders created their society around the belief that ordinary people should be the focus of any form of organized government, since most of her people originally fled the tyranny of European kings and aristocrats. Long considered a bellwether for national political attitudes, the Midlands have been a key swing vote region in most national debates in American politics, from the abolition of slavery to the presidential election of 2024. In terms of geography, the Midlands finds its cultural heartland in southeastern Pennsylvania, southern New Jersey, and northern Delaware and Maryland, which later spread to central Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, northern Missouri, and most of Iowa. It also includes the less arid eastern halves of Nebraska, Kansas, and South Dakota, while the region's main cities are considered shared border cities, such as Chicago, which is shared with Yankeedom, and St. Louis, which is shared with Greater Appalachia. While less aware of its national identity, throughout its existence, the Midlands has proven to be a moderating force in terms of national politics. Considered the most powerful nation during the colonial period and early republic, the Tidewater has always been known as a conservative sector of the nation, whose citizens place a high value on governmental authority while placing little emphasis on equality or public participation in political movements. Founded by the unlanded younger sons of Southern English aristocrats, the early founders of the Tidewater region were hungry to reproduce the semi-feudal manorial society they had left in the English countryside, where they recreated what England had excluded them from due to their lack of birthright in a given aristocratic family. Responsible for a good deal of the aristocratic inflections found in the Constitution, including the Electoral College and Senate, who were originally appointed by legislators rather than the electorate at large, the self-identified Cavaliers of the Tidewater region succeeded in creating a country gentleman's paradise in the Virginia lowlands, Maryland, southern Delaware, and northeastern North Carolina, with indentured servants and later slaves playing the role of the English peasant class. Waning in power in the 1830s and 40s, the Tidewater followed the lead of the Deep South slaveholding states, leading to significant territorial absorption into the Midland region, while its expansion was blocked by rivals from expanding into the Appalachian Mountains. Founded in the early 18th century by immigrant settlers from the war-ravaged borderlands of Northern Ireland, Northern England, and the Scottish lowlands, Greater Appalachia was founded by clannish settlers possessing a warrior ethos and a deep embrace of individual liberty and personal sovereignty. Deeply suspicious of aristocrats and social reformers, the residents of Greater Appalachia have been portrayed by writers, filmmakers, and television producers as redneck hillbillies who clashed with Indians, Mexicans, Yankees, Tidewater lords, and Deep South aristocrats as they pressed into the region. During the Civil War, much of the region sided and fought for the Union cause, except for the newly created West Virginia region, made up of secessionist regions in Western Virginia, Eastern Tennessee, and Northern Alabama. Greater Appalachia is made up of the southern tiers of Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois, the Arkansas and Missouri Ozarks, the eastern two-thirds of Oklahoma, and the hill country of Texas, while its combative culture has provided the nation with military greats such as Andrew Jackson, Davy Crockett, and Douglas MacArthur. The region also added to the nation's cultural blending, including bluegrass and country music, stock car racing, and fundamental evangelical Christianity. Modeled after a West Indies-style slave society, the Deep South has been known throughout the majority of its history as a white supremacist aristocratic stronghold where, much like classical republicanism of the ancient slaveholding world, democracy existed only for the privileged few. Considered to be the least democratic of all the American nations, the Deep South began in Charleston before spreading out across the southern lowlands, eventually including most of South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, and Louisiana, as well as western Tennessee, southeastern North Carolina, Arkansas, and Texas. Successfully resisting a Yankee-led occupation during the post-Civil War Reconstruction era, despite the region's persistent attempts at racial segregation, the Deep South has long been locked in a contentious battle with Yankeedom and its left coast and its New Netherland detractors. Considered the most overtly nationalistic of the American nations, New France at first took root in the province of Quebec in the early 1600s, blending the folkways of peasant culture in the north of France with the traditional values of the native peoples of northeastern North America. Epicentered around Louisiana and French Canada, the New French embraced Catholicism in a sense of noblesse oblige, which is an inferred responsibility of the privileged over the less fortunate. Down-to-earth, egalitarian, and consensus-driven, recent polls have demonstrated that the New French make up the most liberal people among the nations of America, which have in turn imparted many of their liberal attitudes to the Canadian Federation. Dating back to the late 16th century, when Spain founded settlements on the west coast of North America, El Norte spread from the U.S.-Mexican border for hundreds of miles in either direction, encompassing South and West Texas, Southern California and the Imperial Valley, Southern Arizona, most of New Mexico and parts of Colorado, as well as the Mexican states of Tamaulipas, Nuevo León, Coahuila, Chihuahua, Sonora, and Baja. Overwhelmingly Hispanic, the region has acquired a reputation for independence, self-sufficiency, and revolutionary sentiment, made worse in recent years by an increasingly militarized border, much like Berlin and Germany during the Cold War. Extending from Monterey, California to Juneau, Alaska, the left coast includes some of the most progressive cities in North America, including Vancouver, Seattle, Portland, and San Francisco. Originally settled by merchants and missionaries, including woodsmen, farmers, prospectors, and fur traders, as well as Yankee missionaries from back east. Retaining a strong sense of Yankee intellectualism and idealism, left coasters embrace a culture of individual fulfillment, strong government, and an endless push for social reform, including the birthplace of the modern environmental movement. Home to the lion's share of the global computing revolution, the left coast is home to such Silicon Valley tech giants as Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and Apple, while its liberal-minded base made it home to the hippie sex and drug movement of the 1960s. Settled in the late 19th century by explorers, cowboys, and miners, the Far West values individualism and a rugged sense of frontier spirit. Encompassing all of the interior, west of the 100th meridian, from the northern boundary of El Norte through the southern frontier of the First Nation, the Far West includes northern Arizona, the inland empires of California, Washington, and Oregon, along with much of British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Alaska. It also includes portions of the Yukon and the Northwest Territories, the arid western halves of the Dakotas, Nebraska, and Kansas, and nearly all of Idaho, Montana, Colorado, Utah, and Nevada. Politically conservative with libertarian populist leanings, while the Far West values self-reliance with a strong anti-government sentiment, it has historically relied heavily on federal infrastructure projects and aid from Washington, D.C., making the region more than just a paradox of conflicting attitudes. originating with indigenous groups in the far north. The First Nation of Native North Americans embraces values of tribal governance, environmental stewardship, and autonomy, whose political leanings call for a focus on indigenous rights and a fearsome self-determination. Maintaining their distinct traditions despite centuries of pressure from European settlers to inculcate into the American way. In more recent years, the people of the First Nation now have a chance to place Native North Americans in a position to reinstill their cultural identity into the complex fabric of the American nations. While the First Nation frequently overlaps with many other nations of America, their presence is most felt in the northern fringes of the far west, including the Yukon and Northern Territories, Labrador and the entirety of Nunavut and Greenland, the northern tier of Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta, as well as much of northwestern British Columbia and the northern two-thirds of Quebec, making the cultural nations of America a complex tapestry of values, attitudes, and political ideologies. And there you have it, the cultural nations of America, today on the Daily Dose. Today's Daily Dose documentary is brought to you by PlatosPeach.com, a lesson planning tool leveraging content like this and much more for educators and homeschooling parents. Check out the description for more information so that you too can teach something new every day.